for us, if we could be more like children, to be able to just do something for the sake of doing it. It's like I watch kids come into the mats for the first time, right? And they allow themselves just to look like idiots, right? Attempting to take each other down and like rolling around. But yet at the same time, in those moments, they exhibit some of the most intuitive responses I've ever seen people do. It's like if I try to teach somebody to do what these kids do, it'd take them like 10 years.
Back again.
Good evening, afternoon.
Good evening, sir.
Good. What was it like? The Truman? Did you ever watch the Truman Show?
I didn't. You're the second person in like 2 weeks who's asked me that.
That's
And they're like, you got to watch it.
It's a classic film.
Yeah.
In case I don't see you. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
All right. I'm going to look for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to look for that. Yeah, I wanted to take this moment to pour live.
Oh, he's going to do it.
Yeah. Pour this thing live. Okay.
Oh.
It's kind of...
Failure.
Wait, what? Dude, I'm doing it right.
Oh, no, that's good. That's good. Look at it. See
What?
how much...
Wait, I
see
don't
how
even
much
know what
you're-
I'm looking for, dude. What am I looking for?
No fizzing. Because all the carbonation will now stay in your drink.
Interesting.
Minimal fizz exposure means that
Okay.
that stays in your drink.
Okay.
Ergo,
Honestly, can I be honest?
absolutely.
You showed me how to do this before. And the reason I sometimes didn't try is because I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to fail. And I think that's what we're talking about today is failure.
That was a good opening.
Yeah.
Nice. I
I
like that.
Thank you. Cheers to that, man.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, so that's good. This is lime, liquid death, sparkling water.
Severed lime.
Yeah,
It is very
so.
good.
Yeah, dude. How'd I do?
That was good.
Okay,
But on both accounts, both the pour and the
and
the opener.
yeah,
I like
okay,
that.
good. Well,
Yeah.
at some point I was just like, you know what, it's not that much big of a deal. I'll just do it. But sometimes failing, it feels more consequential than just like pouring a drink badly. And when we talk about failure, my first question, and as I was thinking on this topic today, is when we say failure, when we talk about failure, what are we talking about? Because Simon Sinek, who is a pretty...
Starts with Y.
Yeah. So he has some good stuff out there. And when he talks about failure, he says that the word failure is like the word cancer. There's stage 1 melanoma, and then there's like stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Those are like two different things completely. Still, like cancer is like, when you hear it's the C word, it's kind of a big deal. And so he's like, even with failure, sometimes we could be talking about a minor hiccup versus like you just took a step that might end a marriage. So when we talk about failure, what are we talking about? And are there failures that we should avoid, in the sense that if you fail in this way, or and again, so he goes on into trying to like shy away from the word failure and use other words like falling, and we can talk about that. But this idea of like, are there failures that maybe are so bad that we should avoid, and we should be like, man, failing in this way would be detrimental, versus like failing in this way is not so detrimental. Does that make sense? A lot of questions there, but
Yeah, so when I think about it, like based on what you said, I kind of view that inherently failure is a necessary prerequisite for success. You can't have success without failure of some kind. Now, I think you bring up a good point, because it's like, okay, well, what kind of failure are we talking about? Which type of failure is desirable and which type is not? But I think that question largely hinges on your purpose and your pursuit. I think more often than not, people don't fail. They fail to have purpose. I think when plans fail, when achievements fail, they don't fail because people didn't work hard enough. Perhaps, okay, maybe sometimes they do in certain areas, but I think more often than not, what happened was that the way that they were going about it was inherently not going to function because there was a necessary ingredient that was missing, and that was purpose. I think to comment on the adage, a strong enough why can overcome almost any how. I think when people fail, most often, as far as the most common failures that you see, it's actually because things were actually too far divided, spread too thin. And in some cases, I would say that's desirable. It helps you zero in on your purpose and make things more achievable and realistic. However, in other cases, again, that has to occur. The existential in me is going to say that all failure is necessary.
No matter how catastrophic.
No matter how catastrophic.
Ooh. Yeah.
And when I say like use that like high-tech word, I only mean to say that the only true failure is failing to learn from what happened. So in essence, all failure can be necessary. If we're looking at it
can be valuable.
Yes. And I would also argue necessary.
No, necessary.
Necessary, right? In the sense that like if there is truly no other way for us to see what is happening, or rather the interference that's going to take place, then that's a necessary ingredient to occur, right? So I guess, so case in point, right? Like, and this is going to sound really, really drastic, but how did we know we wanted seatbelts in cars? Too many people flew through windshields.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in that context, it's like, all right, well, we don't want that type of failure, or rather we want to decrease that significantly. People can still choose not to wear them. Okay. But it's provoking. There's a lot more for us to say.
Yes, because even that last point you said, it's like we don't want that kind of failure, but it took some kind of pretty bad failure to even get to the point where we're like, we need to put seatbelts in these cars. Yeah. Right. Failure. I'm going back to something you said earlier, that failure is necessary on the pathway to success. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I think that's where people actually fail, is they don't accurately assess what they want their success to be. I think most often when we hear the word failure, we're thinking about two things, either athletics or business. Right? Those are the most common. Yeah. Obviously, you can think about it in the context of relationships.
Right. And also, like, even within the wider context of athletics and business, is life stages.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not where I need to be in my life. And so have I failed. Right.
Yeah. I'm curious, for you, what do you think? Like, have you experienced that?
Oh, dude. So when I graduated college, so for those of you who don't know, I'm a therapist now, but I only discovered I wanted to be a therapist very recently in my 30-something years of life. So in my undergrad, I studied business at the University of Michigan, and Stephen Ross Business School is the University of Michigan's business school. At the time that I was attending, it was like the top 3 business schools in the country for like undergrad. And basically what they do in these business schools is that most of these companies, like the consulting companies, the banks, they come to the school to recruit because they know like the caliber of candidates is high. So like they're literally gonna send the recruiters interview there. The business school themselves, like they'll help us with our resumes. Like they set you up they spoon feed you. Like it's if you don't get a job after college, like that's on you, man. Because they do so much to help you succeed in the corporate world, like financially. Because when they measure their success and their stats and their rankings based on the jobs that their graduates got. So that's how business school works.
Makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So they're like, we're trying to help you guys. So you can imagine like going into this, the mindset that it puts into students of like, dude, like they're giving me everything to get a job. And so I'd like interview with consulting companies. Wasn't getting jobs prior to graduation. Most people had jobs like the summer before their senior year because they did internships. They got like full-time offers. Granted, I was an international student, so there's a few more difficulties.
Layers,
because like sponsoring visas, like companies have to do that. But hey, there were other international students getting jobs. And so I graduate and no job. It was December 2016. And basically when you're an international student, they give you a year to find a job. Because if you don't have a job, there's no reason for you to be in the country. And you need a company to sponsor your visa. So like, okay, dude, you have... No, was it a year? I don't even know if it was a year. Yeah, it was a year. Yeah, so they give you a year to find a job. And so I start applying. So I was crashing on a friend's couch.
Couch surfing.
Couch surfing, yeah. On the same couch, though. Surfing on the same couch. And every day I'd wake up and I'd just apply to jobs, man. Like at least 50 a day. Like I just... That's all, because that's all I did. That's all I had. It's like if I want to stay in the U.S., I'm gonna apply to jobs. I just be shooting out applications daily. Like it was like autopilot. LinkedIn was my Facebook, my Instagram. Like I was just on LinkedIn, Indeed, looking at all these job posts. I learned like nowadays, like any company I see, like when I see trucks on the road and or just like factories, I recognize almost every company because I maybe applied to that job or at least I saw the posting. Wow. So, and you get to a point where you're like, this is the job I want. And then it's like, dude, I'll just take anything, right? That at least would allow me to work. So I'm just applying to jobs. I'm networking, all these things. 6 months go. 6 months pass. I interviewed with like some big companies. Like I interviewed with like Facebook, Google, like all, some big companies, and I got to like final stages and then I'd get a rejection. 6 months pass and I'm just like, man, what is going on? Top business graduate, can't get a job. And that was probably one of the lowest points of my life in terms of like, I just feel like I failed in a way. And not only that, I finished college like a few years later than my peers from like high school because I like took 2 gap years for different reasons. And the way I was framing it in many ways was just like, man, these guys are like, they have like own houses, they have cars, they're like living in their own apartments. I'm just like crashing on a friend's couch and he's feeding me. Like I'm not making much money. And I'm just like, dude, I'm like 20, 24, 25. And this is life. And so at that point, like I returned home to Kenya, where I'm from, and started applying for jobs there. And in my mind, I was like, dude, I'm a US graduate. These Kenyan companies are gonna be salivating. They're like, dude, you know what I mean? And
they didn't care.
Granted, yeah. Well, they didn't care. He's like, they didn't care. Right. Granted, I was a bit more picky with the jobs in Kenya, but it took a while. It took like another like 5 months for me to get a job. And I did get I got the job, and I think it all worked out for the best. Like when I look back, I'm like, I wouldn't have it any other way. So it's a pretty big job, and making good money in Kenya, living well, got married, managed to like, visit my wife in the States, pay for flights, all these. I was living well, but I hated my job.
You hated it.
Hated it.
Okay.
Hated it. Like, and then I did like the, what's his name? I forgot, John Holland's RIASEC
Yeah.
career
Thoracic.
assessment.
Yep.
And based on my profile, I'm like the job I had was like my complete opposite of what I would enjoy and thrive in. But I was good at it, but I hated what I was doing, like Excel sheets, analytics. I'm good at it, but I just hated it. I enjoyed talking to people more in the office, learning about their lives, different, I'm like, these people are so successful at their careers and jobs, but in their relationships, things are not going well. And that was a point of curiosity for me. And that basically led me down the path of wanting to pursue counseling. So even in that, it was like, man, like, have I just like failed to here? Like, I finally get the job and I don't like it. Is this a failure too? Everyone else around me likes their job, but I don't. What's wrong? And then now I need to start a career from scratch. I want to start a career from scratch, but still with that too is like, not a lot of your friends are starting careers from scratch, man. But I think again with failure is what is success to you? Because depending on what is success, like it really impacts how you frame the experience that you're calling failure. Because now I look back, I'm like, I'd say, I don't even know if I'd call it failure. It's just like necessary steps to get to where I was.
Necessary prerequisite.
Yeah, to get to where I am now, which I feel like I'm more in line with pursuing my purpose and the things I care about and value and how I can serve and be of value to the world. And that, like, all that stuff will like help me so immensely.
So it sounds like what you identified there, that last part, is the purpose.
Yeah, that's the purpose. Yeah. And without the moments of quote unquote failure, I would not have understood the possibilities. I would not have, what's the word? Pursued the bounds of what was possible in my life if I didn't have those experiences. And I think that's the beauty of failure. Like even when you look at kids who are learning to walk, I'm sure you can relate to that with your own children.
I can.
Right? When a kid's learning to walk and they fall down, you're not like, man, what are you, such a failure? What are you doing? In fact, we're excited when they fall and get back up, and they fall and they get back and fall and get back and fall, because we know they're exceeding the bounds of what is possible. They're achieving a new level of capability, and that's going to give them much wider access of experiences and ways they can experience the world. But that wouldn't happen if they didn't. And so we're okay with that level of, I guess, failure, because we know what's going to happen. It's easier to see it in kids, but it's harder to see it in our own experiences.
I think it's harder to see in our own experiences because it's harder to accept. We have a harder time accepting the reality of the scenario and the beneficence that it has. I hear your story, and it's very well, no, there's a lot of differences to mine. Let's just be real. Like,
okay, I'm so curious to hear.
Yeah, so I followed coming out of high school. I think I had mentioned this at another time, but I had some opportunities to, maybe run at the collegiate level, that type of thing. I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And so I followed my friends to college. Started in college. I was just so lost. didn't know what I wanted to do. My grades were suffering, so I dropped out. I worked
Mm.
because that was the only thing that I knew to do. So I remember like throughout this summer, I think I had worked construction, and then basically, I was working any job I could to try to find a niche of something that like, okay, like, do I like this? Do I enjoy that? The trouble for me was not really finding a job like of some kind. The trouble was staying in it long enough to figure out whether I could do it and last in it and find meaning and purpose in it.
Mm.
But at the time, I also didn't know how to really articulate those questions well enough to say that, okay, I could find meaning and purpose in this. I didn't really know how to ask myself the question of, well, what would really be meaningful to me that I feel like I could have a high degree of value and purpose from. And the reality was for me is that it took many failures in many different types of jobs to be able to see that, oh, yeah, like, no, this path in this direction is one that I desire.
Mm.
And by that, I mean, okay, yeah, I'm obviously a therapist now.
Yeah.
Like, and even when it came to doing therapy, I remember knowing that I was like, I can't just be a therapist. Like, I don't want to just be a therapist. It was so funny. Like, I never thought I would have like a therapy practice in like a gym at the same time.
Right. That was you didn't plan that.
No, I didn't plan that. I just knew that like I wanted to have it be a pretty significant part of my life, that I have some type of movement in what I do and I can connect meaning and purpose really well. And I definitely wanted to work independently.
You wanted to be your own boss.
Well, yeah, because like for me, freedom was everything. And it still is largely. Like freedom was my why.
Yeah.
And has been.
And you learned that freedom was your why. How?
Yeah. So I think
like how did you come to value that?
I think that was something that I inherently wanted like in my teens, early 20s, but then discovered that no, I actually needed that.
Mm-hmm.
I needed in order for me to thrive, I needed the ability to make my own decisions and learn from them and make my own mistakes and learn from those. And when the buck stopped with me, I was much more apt to attempt to achieve greater, right? Or to do more, because the skin in the game was my own. And so to a very large degree, like, yeah, that was it.
Yeah. I think that's like a great example of learning from failed experiences, maybe, that like, oh, this is something.
And don't get me wrong, I mean, there were some jobs in there, honestly, I think I've said this before, like one of my favorite jobs was working at Domino's.
Yeah.
I love making pizzas. It's so fun. Like, I love it. It's fantastic. If working at Domino's could pay the bills the way that my lifestyle is now, like,
sign me up.
I would do it, man. I'd do it in a heartbeat. Now, granted, like the way my life exists now, like I'm able to, there's still busyness to it, but the purpose in it is very strongly intertwined to why I do what I do. And I would say when I have failures now, it's when I lose sight of that purpose. And I think you brought up a point too, like failures now are heavily based on the doors of perception.
Mm-hmm. So when you're saying like when I lose sight of that purpose.
Yeah. So for example, like I think about, okay, I brought this up, like, I think, well, we've talked about it before regardless, but I've competed in jiu-jitsu at brown belt. Like I've had 18 matches now
at brown belt.
Yeah. And 1, 2 as in, so I'm
2 out
2
of 18.
for 18. Yeah. Right. So not a good record at all. That's a losing season. Like,
and especially that you said like, it felt like in your earlier belts, you were winning a lot more.
Oh yeah. No, I was spoiled. Yeah. Right. Now, I think the thing that I failed to do well was to understand what my purpose was going into this phase and journey of life and what those expectations were properly. I didn't prime myself for those. I didn't prime myself for the reality that, like, look, in order for, like, no person can serve two masters. He will either love the one or hate the other.
Mm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And inherently, it is so hardwired in me to need that. Like, I need a purpose behind what I'm doing. But then I get, again, I think many people may as well, like, when you get into something, you get excited about it, but then, like, you just start doing it for performance sake. And so it's like, oh, like, of course I'm at this level, I just go and compete, and that's what I need to do. However, there was no well-intended purpose behind what that was looking like. What was my purpose? Was my purpose to win? Was my purpose to do it just for the purpose of doing it? If so, did I cater my expectations to that? No, I didn't. And I also didn't put in the training necessary to be able to achieve at a level that my expectations were at. Therefore, my purpose was really, really off the mark, right? Once I could come to the place of recognizing that, like, no, like, my purpose in all of this is just to be able to do jiu-jitsu. That's it. And actually, even more so for the people that I coach. Right? Ideally, my purpose would be able to show them, hey, like, this is what competing looks like. This is how you do this. This is how you lose, and keep your chin up and go and do it again. I had to show myself that. Those have been hard pills to swallow, but I guarantee I'm better at doing that way more effectively. And I think many of us, it's like, when you say that, it's like, who wants to learn that lesson? Right?
Yeah.
Who wants to go down that path?
Yeah.
I think if I was in a different life to where, okay, that's my main source of income, and that's something I have to succeed with or have some level of success with, then my purpose and therefore my plan would have to be much more intricately intertwined with that way of being. As it stood, though, my purpose was very different than just being on the mats and competing at a high level. It never stood there.
Mm-hmm.
The byproducts I achieved earlier happened as a result of chance and perhaps time, what I was able to do. But as purpose shifts and is more directive, so does your ability to be able to dedicate time towards that. Anyways.
So, yeah, this is good. That's good. I think some of the things that come to mind is, so when we don't clarify purpose, our ability to understand what we consider as failure is kind of more, what is it attached to, you think? Like, to, like, the circumstance, or like the socially conventional
I think
idea
it's
of success?
I think it's attached to whatever the quick fix is, right? Because inherently, like, the most immediate thing, I think that's what we would attach it to quickly. So in my case, it was like, okay, well, I was competing, so obviously, like, my purpose would be attached most quickly to winning.
Gotcha.
Right? Or how well I perform, because it's a performance-based metric. But we've talked about that before. If my purpose is attached to a performance, well, now it's very dangerous waters.
Yeah. I feel like many times performance is that metric that is usually, we easily go to it. Mm-hmm.
And I think about this. I think that so often, man, and you and I may have even talked about it too. I think that one of the biggest problems, admittedly, I just gave an example about how I got sucked into it, but I think people all across the map, right? There are so many things in our day-to-day life that can distract us from purpose, so that we are constantly searching and never identifying, and in this constant state of flux and scarce insufficiency.
Yeah. Which in many ways is meaninglessness.
Yeah, and then we get
without that
depressed.
purpose.
Yeah. That is depression.
Can you share a bit more
So,
about
like, and I'm sure that there's other, again, I'm sure that there's other people that articulate this as well. But at the end of the day, when we can't clearly identify purpose in our day-to-day life, as far as why we're doing what we're doing, and I'm not talking about a goal. I'm talking about the overarching theme to our life. Like why we wake up every morning, go to the same job, married to the same people, like why we do that. Why we care for our kids the way we do, or a partner or spouse, like why you do that day in, day out. Why? What is the purpose and intent of that? And if we can't identify that, we get very lost very quickly. And sometimes I think what happens is we actually don't think about that enough. So we just get distracted and inadvertently very depressed. And so we distract ourselves. And I think Viktor Frankl was the one that was famous for saying this, and that when man doesn't have a deep sense of why, he distracts himself with pleasure. And that's what we do. Like we immediately have these handheld devices that can just distract us for hours on end.
Yeah. Right. Gaming, social media. And then going back to that is that they create like a fake sense of purpose. Like pleasure creates a fake sense of purpose.
Yes.
Because it's very, like you said, it's instant relief. And so it's like, okay, do this, achieve this instant reward, success, purpose, but only for a very short time. And oftentimes the back end of that is more meaninglessness. And so the cycle continues.
The way that I would describe it, because I want to be careful here, because I don't think that goals are bad. Right.
Yeah,
games are, in my way of thinking, kind of like miniature little tiny goals that you create that have absolutely no purpose. Mm-hmm. In my articulation, I would say that games are like gasoline for a car. Mm-hmm. Your goals are the gasoline. Purpose is the roadmap. Now, obviously, you need gasoline. You got to be able to move.
You got to have those goals. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to be able to move. But if you don't know where you're going,
that's where the issue comes in.
You're just spinning your tires for no reason whatsoever. And you're on a hamster wheel.
I like that imagery. Man. Yeah. So failure, it's, there's another piece here of failure that is often, we often deal with, where maybe we have, I don't know if maybe we don't have a sense of purpose, but maybe we feel like we know what we want to do and need to do, but it feels so overwhelming because we want it to go well. We want to succeed at pursuing that purpose, maybe. And sometimes that purpose seems so big and overwhelming that we fear failing. And so we might not even try. And I guess what I'm talking about is like perfectionism.
Yeah.
Right.
See,
so it's like,
I'm going to disagree on a hard no there.
Tell me. Yeah. What am I missing there?
I think when perfectionism happens, it is void of true purpose. Because I think perfectionism inherently is based on performance. A perfect performance.
Yeah.
Which is not valuable. Mm-hmm. Right? Or I should say value filled. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying there is not value in performing perfectly. Right? If you can have a 10 out of 10 on your gymnastics routine, that's excellent. That's fantastic. Absolutely. Attempt to do that 100%. But I think we have to be very careful, right? I think the balance here is that okay, no matter what my overarching value, why I do what I do is for A, B, C, or D. Mm-hmm. That's why I do what I do. And those things have to be more than just to get a 10.
Right. Or to make it to the Olympics.
Yeah. It's like,
or to be the best.
No, because at some point,
employee of the month.
Yeah. It runs out. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking like
It's finite.
exactly, it's finite. So my purpose in describing this is that people have meaning and purpose, right? If I was a different type of salesman, right, I would be telling, or we'd be having a conversation about me telling people how to level up and constantly be around people that are doing the same types of things that they're doing and constantly be reaching your goals and being committed to success and
Right.
and being consistent no matter what, all the time, right? All good things, don't get me wrong. Like I think there's many influencers out there, I think that's the word for them, that will preach this message. And make no mistake, that's what they're doing. They're preaching.
Yeah.
Right.
It's straight up preaching. Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the
Because
gospel of hustle.
the gospel of hustle, I love that.
Yeah.
But make no mistake, like that's what they're selling. They are selling something finite. Maybe you feel better about being able to reach a certain goal, but then also maybe you wake up at 3 a.m. recognizing that your heart is pounding and you don't know why. Everything is actually fine, but you can't identify what's going on. That is what I hear a lot of.
Right.
And that is what you're not going to hear from all of those people is that, hey, you can still do all this stuff and you can still have that moment. That heart-wrenching moment when everything is fine and you don't know what is going on because your heart is about to beat out of your chest. What have I not determined here? What is happening? They're anxious. And I would say anxiety also comes from the fact that we inherently haven't really identified where we are going with our life.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm going to go.
And so it's like, would you say that's perceived failure? That's the failure we're feeling? Like, am I failing that anxiety?
I actually think that's the recognition that even in my attempts to achieve, this wasn't enough. I thought I had success. What was the problem? So yeah, you could argue, there's another failure. What have I done?
Yeah. That's good. There's this question people ask. I've heard it. Coaches ask it. Therapists ask it. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Why do you think people ask that question? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?
Like, is that a serious? Like, what would I like?
Are you
asking me that question, or are you asking like, what do I?
Why is that question? Why do people ask that question?
I mean, I think the obvious reason is like, oh, they want to try to elicit a response that's free from fear.
So with failure, there's fear.
Sure.
Failure comes with fear.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think it's a relevant question.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's a relevant question to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Like, can you be inspired to go do that thing? I think a lot of time, and I think that's a relevant thing. I also think though that more often than not, people still don't start with the large question of purpose. Yeah, maybe they see, or rather, maybe they say like all these glamorous ideas about, I would go, I don't know,
I'd start my own business.
Yeah, start my own business. Or I'd be all these things. I'd climb Everest. Like, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times though that's actually not necessarily the part that's getting in their way, in as much as the why. Right? Being able to identify the underpinnings of why they do what they do. Right.
So we have purpose, right?
Sure.
And then we have those miniature goals.
Yeah.
That oftentimes in pursuing those miniature goals, that's when we don't we don't always achieve them as planned.
Yeah.
Usually, like life doesn't always go as planned because of maybe failures. We didn't learn the piano as fast as we thought we would. We didn't gain that belt. We didn't win, right? So we're talking about having that larger purpose that keeps us going and helps us reframe the failure, right? And also understanding that those perceived failures, in many ways, are what, like we said earlier, leads you to build the skills, right? So you can continue on that path, right?
Yeah. So if we were talking about like, and it sounds like we're steering back to this idea. Okay, well, what if I still want to actually succeed at something?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
What
Because
if I
that's
s-
like the tangible.
the
Like,
tangible,
I want to succeed
palpable
at my
thing.
job. I want to
Yeah.
succeed at the new skill. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. I think again, it's just helpful to remind yourself that you're only failing when you're pushing the boundaries. You're only failing when you're pushing the boundaries. And failure, in many ways, that perceived like, oh man, I didn't get it. Or like I thought it would be, I thought that when I want to be a writer. And as soon as I put my thoughts down on paper, you realize how crappy your writing is, because in your head it sounded so perfect and you had this story. That always happens, man. And then you like you write a paragraph and you're like, dude, who's this, like, elementary school this elementary school grammar, and you get so like frustrated with yourself because it's just not meeting the expectation. But I think that frustration can also be a positive indication that you care. And sometimes failure is like, do you care? Like, is this something you care about? Right? And then again, like being careful to attach it to the purpose, not so much the goal. But in many ways, failure can show us that this is something I care about and I want to continue pursuing, and can help you really ask yourself again, like, why am I doing this? It's a good way to look at the mirror and ask yourself, like, why am I on this path?
Yeah, I think that ultimately the reason that's powerful is because I think the reason that failure inhibits us so much when it does is because we become emotional. And when I say emotional, I mean that we allow our emotions to take over in a negative respect. If you look at some of the people that have achieved some really great, fantastic things, the way that they trained for these things was almost autonomous. Like if we think about like, say like Alex Honnold. So are you familiar with, are you familiar with Free Solo, the film Free Solo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
So-
dude, that's
What do you know about that guy?
heart wrenching.
What do you know about that guy?
That he's insane.
No, actually, he's not.
No, he's not actually.
Yeah, but
okay, go ahead.
So
Tell me about it.
so essentially, brain scans reveal, and you can correct me if you want to do a Google search, but I believe that,
Yeah, no, it's
maybe
what you're saying.
So-
Yeah,
yeah, you
I
know
think
where
it's
I'm going.
accurate.
So
Mhm.
basically, like the regions of his brain that would perceive fear and rather, in most cases, contextualize emotional response were actually much smaller, right? Or the responsiveness on fMRI imaging, and that's debatable as far as like the accuracy to that. However, what we know is that like in his presentation, you watch the film, it's like there wasn't a lot of raw emotion displayed in terms of his
Oh,
like
did it make
fear.
that
Yeah,
comment?
it was strict. Oh, I do this because I like this. Why would I do anything different?
What else am I gonna do?
What else am I going to do? There's only one thing to do here.
Even when it doesn't work.
Even when it doesn't matter. Why would I actually do anything? And what's happening there in that moment, I think for people that have this type of success is that they're very well adapted to keeping emotional impulse out of the equation,
To their decision making.
to their decision making, and especially when it doesn't serve them.
Mhm.
Right. So if I think about the world of jujitsu, it's right. Like, okay, you lost on your way to, like, let's say your goal is, oh, well, you want a world title, right? Or you want to go to Pans and get a gold, or you want to go to Worlds and place gold. It's like, well, why? Because you want that recognition? Because more than likely, you are actually going to achieve your goal more quickly if you focus on the fact that I love doing what I'm doing. I'm going to do it for 12 hours a day because I love it. Why would I do anything different? This
the
is
byproduct of that.
Exactly. The byproduct of that function, when you become engrossed in something and obsessed with it, that is, I will. And I would say actually, like to this point, an accurate person in this representation is Mickey Musumeci, right?
Okay.
Like, yeah. So like, if you listen to him talk, it's like, oh yeah, I train 12 hours a day with people that are hobbyists.
Yeah. So jiu-jitsu, like.
Yeah. So he's like,
Yeah.
obviously very famous in the jiu-jitsu world, but the same thing with, Gordon Ryan, arguably, though there's some different pieces there that I would say probably helped. But
not something that rhymes with fibroids.
Yeah. But in that realm though, I mean, at least everyone in his ballpark was still doing the same thing. So arguably you say, okay, everybody was on the same plane, right? However, arguably, if we know anything about his history, it's like, okay, there was an inordinate amount of time doing this thing just to do it. So the obvious thing to do was just to keep doing this thing. Right? So if I want to achieve this byproduct of being the best in a certain area, then that's all I need to do.
That's the secret.
That's the secret. It's not inordinately complicated. Right? We've heard about like Simon Gladwell, like 10,000 hours.
Yeah, Malcolm
Excuse me,
Gladwell.
Simon.
Yeah.
Simon.
You got
Now
it.
I'm mixing in my authors.
I know.
Right.
Mhm.
But no, I think in that way it's actually very simple. If you want success in an area, give it time.
Mhm.
Give yourself time.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's it's when you love it for that its own sake. That's like that. I think Simon Sinek, again going back, he calls it the difference between finite games and infinite games, and he took this from a psychologist back in the 80s.
No way.
This concept. Yeah.
You mean what we're saying isn't actually new?
Yeah.
Who would have
Right.
guessed?
So he says like a finite game is like a football match where there's teams, there's you score 90 minutes. There has to be a score for the game to end, or right?
Exactly.
But an infinite game is more so like I just play soccer. Like there's no end to it, right? So, and people who play infinite games are actually the ones who are really good at the finite games because they're just putting in. They just do it.
They're playing it as if it's infinite.
Yes.
And I would argue that that's why, in some ways, that's where you see these people that are so like in some ways, your video games are meant to try to pull you into that respect. Except the only problem is that they will do so even when your values don't align with that.
Okay.
Right. So
yeah.
because obviously it can provide that temporary relief and reward. But I would say that when your values and everything about your being can actually be there and be in that place, okay, yeah, now you have a very high probability for success here.
So what happens when you seem to be okay? Because this is another thing, and I just realized I failed dismally because you put this deck of cards on my side here so I could use it as a coaster, and I haven't been using it for the whole podcast.
That's okay.
And I just realized as you were talking that, so I kind of feel, I don't know if the listeners here noticed that, but I noticed it, and I felt kind of dumb for not, just like the deck of cards is there and it's on you, right? And then there's this other big piece of failure of that, and I one of my favorite influencers, his name's Jay Shetty, and he says,
I don't know who that is. Who's that?
oh, he was a guy who used to be like a monk. So he was in the business world, and then he was in college, and he went to India and became a monk for like 3 years, and then came back into the business world.
Okay.
And he's very good at articulating a lot.
So he
of
started
areas
with
of
why.
purpose. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's very big on why.
Sure.
And so he just like says a lot of cool stuff.
Nice.
And yeah, basically,
as long as you can
that's all
say
he
cool
does.
things.
Yeah, he just says cool stuff, and he's pretty wise and whatever. So he says that it's not that we're afraid to fail, it's we're afraid to be seen failing. It's not that we're afraid to start from the bottom, it's we're afraid to others to see us start from the bottom,
Yeah.
right?
100%.
There's a huge social component
Yeah.
that it's like, oh, if nobody was watching,
Yeah.
who cares that you know what I'm saying? But because I'm like, man, we're on a podcast, like people are watching the screen. I'm like, dude, I'm just like, dude, they're gonna be like, David, what are you doing, man?
How could you?
Yeah, how could you not use this? Right. And so there's that huge social component of failure, is that we don't want others to see us not achieving, or we don't want, even like developmentally, from a psychological perspective, it's like, hey, okay, at this age, you're supposed to learn how to walk. And it's okay. We understand if you fail at this age, but dude, you're like 5 years old and you don't know how to walk. It's like the perception of that failure is even bigger, because it's like, no, we accepted your failure then, but you're still failing now. What does that mean? And I think people struggle with that a lot.
Excuse me, I just burped because this drink is delicious. But I think that's a great point. But I think, again, what happens there is the failure actually isn't that you put your deck of cards there. The failure is in the emotional impulse, right? And for us, if we could be more like children, to be able to just do something for the sake of doing it. It's like, I watch kids come into the mats for the first time, right? And they allow themselves just to look like idiots, right? Attempting to take each other down and like rolling around. But yet at the same time, in those moments, they exhibit some of the most intuitive responses I've ever seen people do. It's like, if I try to teach somebody to do what these kids do, it'd take them like 10 years, right? But at the same time, a kid, because they're so free, right? They are so open to a lack of care around perception that it doesn't matter. I would say most children, right? Like they just want to have fun. They want to enjoy something for the sake of enjoying it. It is literally, by definition, the true value of why they are here. Right. And then it's like, in those moments, okay, they have this great capacity. In some ways, I would say that's why, like, you hear a lot of the old school jiu-jitsu guys talk about like how like competitions like ruin jiu-jitsu, right? Because it takes away some element to this thing that was meant to be so meaningful and purposeful. Yeah. But I would argue that a big reason for that is because it gets us sidetracked from this thing that can be so valuable. And I would say that's true with so many things. It's like, okay, if I was a wrestler, right, and I, again, perform the same function, but I get to college, don't have a good college run, and then I stop just because I was like, and then I never wrestle again. How sad is that? Because presumably I started it for a reason. It wasn't just to be number one day, because what is that? Presumably I started it for the love of it, because it was so fantastic to do. Right. And I think that's
that's
huge.
The missing piece, especially with the social, like how people perceive me.
The lighter we can take ourselves, the better, man.
Yeah.
And I also think that's why you see people, at least in the jiu-jitsu world, it's super common. Yeah. They'll have these competitions called high rollers, where guys literally like smoke a lot of pot and then roll and compete. Like, I think it was like I'm trying to remember the guy's name. It's 10th Planet. Eddie Bravo. Yeah, Eddie Bravo. But yeah, so Eddie Bravo, and I'm pretty sure that he was the one that facilitated and still does facilitate a lot of those. But I would argue that, okay, a big reason for that is because it literally takes down the tone in your mind. You don't care.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so arguably, I think that that's hard for a lot of people. Like, how many people do you talk to? It's like they're going to compete and it's like their nerves are just through the roof.
Oh, dude. Yeah, I feel those nerves, man. Like, you're just like, sometimes you're shaking.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Right?
Yeah. And so I think that's where, and unfortunately, I think that's one of the sad things too with kids. It's like kids walk into this and all of a sudden there's this high precedent for performance here. And granted, yes, I think there can certainly be good things here, but you have to be able to stay focused solely on, hey, I do this because I love this thing. That's why I do it. and I want to
Mm.
perform well on account of that.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the natural byproduct of that is, okay, I do this into obsession because I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Did we get off track there?
No, that
Okay.
was good.
Okay.
So, because now I want to, I know, I don't want to end this without addressing maybe more of the more consequential or the failures that have like some really tangible costs to them.
Yeah.
So let's say cheating on your spouse,
Mm.
like you're down, you know, like just the pain and the, you know, the just the, yeah, the eruption and the chaos that ensues from a choice like that, where the failure, you just like the signs of your failure are so visible.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with that? Because maybe someone might be having struggles connecting what we're talking about, like do it for the love of it and like for, you know, just do it for the fun of it versus like, okay, but how do I make sense of the failure where it's like, no,
Well-
I should take this seriously because I just really made this bad decision to hurt my spouse, and maybe they want me to take it seriously too. And how do I make sense of that kind of failure?
Yeah, so I think that's a loaded question, but I might start with another question to say, well, why did we get married? What was our
Purpose.
why? Yeah, what was our purpose?
Yeah.
And in pursuing that, how did we become derailed from that purpose? Because arguably at some point we did, otherwise that wouldn't have happened. Because if we find ourselves getting caught up in a situation to where we are continually making the same mistake over and over again, you could definitely talk to those people that will tell you, okay, well, no, it must be as a result of some type of inordinate shortcoming that you cannot control. Possible, maybe. I would argue, though, that more largely in part, that there's an underpinning here that we haven't identified. It's not to shirk off things that say like, okay, yeah, there's pieces in the proverbial treasure chest of our past that maybe we need to wade through that can help answer some questions as to the current why. It's not to try to dismiss all of that, but I would say a lot of times and too often, people don't know why they make the decisions they make. And they don't know why they make the decisions they make because they never thought about why they were going to make the good decisions they make.
Right. Yeah, like the good decision to
Yeah.
get married.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because why would we do that? Like, why actually? And so I think it's valuable then. Okay, so how do we recover from this? Well, maybe we start by asking the question, well, do I want to? Why would I recover from this? Because that's a hard road. Let's not make the same mistake twice. Mm-hmm. How can I make the most value-laden answer to my question possible? If I can do that, then that can overcome almost any how of, well, how will I never do this again? How will I never end up in the same place again?
Yeah, which is usually what we ask.
Exactly.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, how could I end up?
Exactly.
And it's asked in a very like question, discussion ending way. If that makes sense. It's like, how could I do this? That tone is more so like, dude, you're just terrible, man. Like, how could you do this? And then the discussion is over. All right. And then we sit in that. That's the failure we sit in. Like, dude, you're such a failure, man. Like, how could you do this? Why did you even get married in the first place? But it's not, you're not really asking the question. It's more of like, it ends the statement.
It's just a statement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of times what's not known, and I think sometimes when people, like maybe people haven't like actually, just because you haven't actually had this verbatim conversation with one another doesn't necessarily mean you haven't answered these questions. Like I think sometimes like the most inconspicuous people have already actually identified these answers. Like,
wow. Mm-hmm.
but it's just, it may be phrased very simplistically. It's like, well, because that's what I care about, my family. Right. And you're like, okay,
That's enough.
cool. Right.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Like, right. But at the end of the day, though, like, if you were to flush that out, sit down with them and flush that out and allow them to like put to language more of what they mean by that, what you would have is, I believe, a very clearly identified set of values that point to the fact of, no, this is how I do what I do on a day-to-day basis. This is why I can find meaning and purpose on a day-to-day basis. This is why I can put up with any hell from work or relationships with coworkers because of these things. Now, obviously, there comes a point, I believe, that any person needs to be able to find value and purpose in what they're doing. And so maybe in certain contexts, that means changing vocations for the betterment of their ability to be able to be present for their family. That may mean that. But I would say, as it pertains to specifically spousal relationships, I think a lot of times we don't ask the question why, as it pertains to the good decisions that we make. We're on autopilot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Asking why, man. That's good. And I think going back to something you said earlier is the best thing you can do with failure is asking yourself what you can learn from it.
100%. I would say that failure is the most necessary prerequisite for success. You can't have one without the other. Because success implies overcoming something. It means that you have done something and succeeded. But what are we succeeding over?
Mm-hmm.
Right? The implication is that you had to battle something. You had to go through something to have success at something. Right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not a word.
Right. It's right.
It's a word without meaning.
Yeah. Inherently in success is that.
And arguably, in more context than one, failure is a necessity, especially if you were looking at something as simplistic as exercise. Going to muscle failure has a high level of value in many arenas, right? You have to know where your cap is. There's no other way to determine that without attempting to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. And that at the end of the day, we love the stories where there was failure. We love those. Those are the stories we live for. There is no story without it, really.
100%.
So as humans, we're drawn to that.
It's funny because I think about like one of the greatest failures of all time is Achilles.
Achilles.
Yeah. Like
Achilles' heel, is that where the term comes from?
Yes.
Okay.
100%. So, right, like Greek mythology, you have this famous warrior, right? Arguably the best warrior of all time, right? For mythological purposes. And the guy gets taken out by an arrow. Not even to his heart or his throat, it's to his heel.
Oh, that's where
right?
Okay, that's what the term comes from. Okay.
Yeah, because basically the legend goes is that like his mother was told he'd be a great warrior if she dipped him into the river, and she dipped him in, but up to his heels. She would have to dip him head first, and the only part that didn't go into the river was his heels, which is why that was the most vulnerable part.
Okay, so he's doing like a handstand in the river.
Basically, just being dunked straight up. Okay, dunked as a
and
baby.
Then the arrow hits.
No, so this was when he was a baby. Like in order for him to get these abilities.
Okay.
That's what was needed, right? Mm-hmm. And so like he obviously grows up like impenetrable prowess. And then he has all these feats and gets taken out by an arrow. An arrow. Right, but what's the moral of that story? Right, because it was told for a moral. Like essentially you could look at it from many different angles, but the thing, like, I would argue that in many ways is simply that there can always be something, someone that can get the better of you. Always. If you are not too careful, right? To some degree, we could argue that the story of Achilles, like, he believed he was impenetrable as well, right? We didn't see him walking around with armor around his heel. Presumably, he knew that he was dunked up to that point. So, I would
like that. So, like, it's almost like that level of humility.
Yeah.
Allows us even to be okay with our failure, like our failures, like these things we call failures, oftentimes, and to learn from it.
Yeah, because if the story didn't end with the fact that, well, it killed him,
yeah,
right, then he would probably put some armor around those heels after that.
Yeah,
but he didn't do that because he died. Right. So I think the story is in allegory is meant to tell us many different things. Obviously, there's more than just that one. If we look from a biblical context, it's like, okay, you had the story of Samson, right? Like, arguably, okay, Samson had a very similar scenario. It's like, okay, his mother was told, just don't cut your hair, or rather, don't cut his hair, right? And he will be, like, effectively the greatest warrior. This guy literally lifts a city gate on his back and walks up a hill. I think the equivalent of like 20 miles.
Yeah.
With it on his back.
Yeah. Some wild stuff.
Yeah. And so, like, if you were to go to that part of the world and look at the hill that they're talking about, it's like literally uphill. Like, so they're saying he carried these city gates up a hill on his back. And what makes this really interesting is that there's actually some historical context to argue that this happened. So you're just like,
yeah,
what?
What's going on here?
And then the saddest part too is, like, okay, like, all these things, and then you get a haircut. And that's it. And at the end of the day, his vice was literally sex.
Yeah.
Right. And so, in essence, I think what we're left with there is like, okay, well, yeah, if he didn't die, he did. But if he didn't, well, what would he do? Well, he may not sleep with as many prostitutes.
Right.
He might, that was probably a bad idea. I think I'm going to forego that. Maybe I won't cut my hair no matter what this time. Like, maybe probably the most valuable lesson he could have learned. The only problem was it cost him his life.
Yeah.
And that's why stories are told.
Yeah, man. So it's like, sometimes it's your life on the line that we're talking.
Well, yeah, I think arguably it's always your life, because you only have one to live, right? So at the end of the day, are you going to allow the fact that you had a failure to define, or are you going to allow the fact that failure can enrich your experience, and you can have a valuable intentional experience from that piece?
Good question to end it with.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool, man. Well, cheers on helping me not fail at pouring my drink.
Hey, even if it was, this was still excellent.
Yeah.
Even in spite of any type of failure.
As long as I'm having fun, enjoying it, loving it.
That's what matters.
That's what matters. Awesome.
All right.
That's good.